Imagine this. A few weeks ago, they couldn't stop talking to you. They replied quickly. They asked questions. They wanted to know everything about you. They laughed at your jokes. They made plans. And then something changes. The replies become shorter. The questions disappear. The energy feels different. You're still the same person, but suddenly, they don't seem as interested anymore. And here's the part that hurts. You start asking yourself, what did I do? So you try harder. You text more. You explain more. You become more available. You try to bring back the version of them that used to care. And strangely, that can make things worse. Because sometimes, the moment you start chasing someone's interest, you change the very thing that attracted them in the first place. Think about how attraction usually begins. You don't know someone yet. There's uncertainty, curiosity, things you haven't discovered. You don't know what they'll say next. You don't know what they think of you. And because the story isn't complete, your brain keeps paying attention. But then you learn everything. You know their schedule, their opinions, their reactions. Their messages become predictable. And something changes. Not necessarily because they became a worse person. Not necessarily because you did something wrong, but because the psychological experience changed. Uncertainty became certainty. Curiosity became familiarity. And familiarity can change how much attention we give something. Think about a song you discover for the first time. You play it again, and again, and again. At first, every part feels exciting. Then you know exactly what's coming. The same beat, the same chorus, the same ending. You might still like the song, but you don't feel the same need to play it. Human attention can work in a similar way. And that's the first thing people misunderstand about losing interest. Sometimes, they aren't losing interest in you. They're losing interest in the experience of discovering you. But that's only part of the story. Because there is another reason people lose interest. And it's much more uncomfortable. Sometimes, you start trying too hard to keep them interested. You become available every second. You reply instantly every time. You cancel your own plans. You constantly check whether they're okay. You need reassurance. You start measuring every message. Why did they take 3 hours? Why was that reply shorter? Are they losing interest? And suddenly, the relationship stops being something you're experiencing. It becomes something you're monitoring. And people can feel that pressure. The conversation starts carrying a hidden question. Do you still like me? And once every interaction becomes a test, it stops feeling natural. This doesn't mean you should play games. Disappear on purpose. Pretend not to care. Wait 3 hours before replying just to look important. That's not confidence. That's strategy. And people eventually notice strategy too. The real solution is much simpler. Don't build your entire emotional world around one person's attention. Keep your life. Keep your interests. Keep your friends. Keep your goals. Keep things that exist even when that person isn't around. Because the most attractive kind of independence isn't pretending you don't care. It's genuinely having a life that doesn't collapse when someone becomes distant. And that leads to something even deeper. People don't just lose interest because someone becomes too available. They can also lose interest when they stop feeling seen. And that's where things get interesting. Think about the beginning of almost every interesting connection. Questions, stories, surprises. You want to know how the other person thinks, what they believe, what makes them laugh, what they secretly care about. You're paying attention, but after a while, something happens. You stop asking. You assume you already know the answer. You hear their story, and instead of listening, you're already preparing your response. They tell you about their day. You barely look up from your phone. They share something they're excited about. You give a quick, "That's cool," and move on. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody argued. Nobody walked away. But something quietly disappeared. Curiosity. And curiosity is one of the things that keeps human relationships alive, because attention tells someone, "You're still interesting to me." Without it, even a close relationship can start feeling like background noise. Imagine talking to someone who remembers tiny details about you. You mentioned weeks ago that you wanted to visit a certain place. They remember. You once told them about an important goal. They ask how it's going. You casually mentioned something that makes you nervous. They notice when it comes up again. None of these things are huge, but together, they create a powerful feeling. I'm being noticed. Now compare that with someone who constantly talks about themselves. Every conversation somehow returns to them. You tell a story. They tell a bigger one. You share an opinion. They correct it. You mention a problem. They immediately explain their own. Eventually, you stop sharing. Not because you have nothing to say, because you've learned that the conversation doesn't have room for you. And that's one of the quietest ways interest disappears. People don't always leave because something terrible happened. Sometimes, they simply stop feeling emotionally involved. But there's another trap, and this one is extremely common. You think being more impressive will make someone more interested. So you start performing. You exaggerate your achievements. You pretend to know things you don't. You agree with everything they say. You try to become whatever you think they want. At first, it might seem like you're becoming more attractive, but something important is disappearing. Your individuality. Because attraction doesn't come from being a perfect reflection of someone else's preferences. Imagine meeting someone who agrees with absolutely everything you say. Same opinions, same interests, same reactions, same answers. At first, that might feel amazing, but eventually, you start wondering who they actually are, because there is nothing left to discover. And that gives us another reason interest can disappear. Predictability. Not ordinary familiarity. People can love familiar people. The problem is when someone becomes completely predictable because they're constantly adjusting themselves to be liked. You never know what they genuinely think, because they're always giving you the answer they believe you want. And ironically, trying too hard to be liked can make you less interesting. Because people aren't only attracted to approval, they're attracted to authenticity. Someone who can say, "I actually disagree." Someone who has their own interests, their own opinions, their own boundaries, their own life. That doesn't mean being difficult. It means being real. And here's the paradox. The more comfortable you become with the possibility that someone might not like you, the less you need to perform for them. And when the performance disappears, people finally get to meet the actual person. Here's the uncomfortable question. What if they didn't suddenly change? What if you changed how you behaved around them? Maybe in the beginning, you were relaxed. You had your own life. You didn't analyze every message. You weren't trying to prove yourself. You were simply being yourself. Then you realized you really liked them, and everything changed. You started worrying. You became more available. You needed more reassurance. You began looking for signs. Every conversation became important. Every silence became a problem. And without realizing it, you stopped enjoying the connection. You started trying to control it. That's when attraction can become pressure. Because instead of two people discovering each other, one person is desperately trying to prevent the other from leaving. And people can feel the difference. So what should you actually do when someone starts losing interest? Don't chase harder. Don't manufacture jealousy. Don't suddenly become cold. Don't play the "I'm too busy for you" game. Instead, pay attention to what changed. Did the relationship become one-sided? Did you stop being curious about each other? Did you become too dependent on their attention? Did you stop being yourself? Or did the other person simply realize that the connection wasn't right for them? Because sometimes there is no hidden trick. Sometimes people lose interest, and that's okay. Not every connection is supposed to last. The mistake is believing that you can always find the perfect behavior that makes someone stay. You can't. And trying to control another person's feelings is one of the fastest ways to lose yourself. The people who remain interesting over time usually aren't constantly trying to remain interesting. They keep growing. They discover new things. They maintain their own world. They stay curious. They listen. They have opinions. They have boundaries. And most importantly, they don't treat another person's attention as proof of their own worth. Because here's the final paradox. When you stop desperately trying to keep someone interested, you become more interesting to be around.